Welcome to the fourth video on Aristotle's account of the soul and knowledge. In this video, I want to discuss what Aristotle means by the objects of sense. And so now we're on the back of the handout. I think it's 6 or 7, what is it? 8, handout 8, back of handout 8. What I want to look at are the answers to these questions. So what does Aristotle mean by proper and common sensibles? What are the real things in the world? Are they the real things in the world, or are they something in the mind? And what's the incidental object of sense? This is sort of the foundation of Aristotle's account. And so in order to do that, I want to look at this passage where Aristotle tells us what these are. And this is at 418a7 to 25. And this is on the soul, book 2, chapter 6. Okay. But I want to work through it together slowly because it's a bit dense, and I think it'll be helpful. So okay, the term object of sense covers 3 kinds of objects. 2 kinds of which we call perceptible in themselves. So there's going to be 2 that are perceptible in themselves, whatever that means, while the remaining one is only incidentally perceptible. So 2 are going to be perceptible in themselves, and 1 is going to be incidentally perceptible. Of the first 2 kinds, 1 consists of what is special to a single sense, the other of what is common to many and all of the senses. I call by the name of special subject, special object of this or that sense, that which cannot be perceived by any other sense than that one, and in respect of which no error is possible. In this sense, color is the special object of sight, sound of hearing, flavor of taste. Common sensibles are movement, rest, number, and figure, magnitude. So common sensibles are these guys. These are not special to one sense, but are common to all. There are at any rate certain kinds of movement which are perceptible both by touch and by sight. Okay, so we'll come back to that. We speak of an incidental object of sense, where, for example, the white object which we see is the son of Dares. Here, because being the son of Dares is incidental to the white, so the sun, being the son of Dares is incidental to the white, which is perceived. We speak of the son of Dares as being incidentally perceived. So we're going to want to reflect on this. But let's begin with the proper sensibles. So, what does Aristotle mean by proper and common sensibles? Well, the objects of sense cover 3 kinds. There are those which are perceptible in themselves, and those are going to be the proper and common sensibles, right? So they're perceptible in themselves. That's something we can say about them. He divides the proper and common sensibles into those which are special to a single sense and those which are common to all of the senses. Okay. So we've got proper common sensibles. Proper is special. Common is common. both are going to be perceptible in themselves. Now, question, are these real things in the world, or are they in the mind? What do you guys think? Here you might want to pause the video, take a minute, think about it. Well, they're objects. They're objects. And that suggests, especially when he goes on to give examples of color, of sound, of flavor, right? Those seem to be out in the world. I mean, it seems like the blue in my sweatshirt is out in the world, or the sound of the birds chirping is out in the world, or the flavor of eggplant parmesan is out there in the world, right? It's something that's in, seems to be anyway, it seems to be in, you know, the birds chirp, or my sweatshirt, or the flavor of the eggplant parmesan. And so we're going to say that they're real things in the world. But they're perceptible in themselves, which means they produce sensible forms. So they produce forms or species in my mind that are going to share a form with the real things in the world. Okay. And these are going to be, right, so the common one, so it's special, we can say, we can give examples like sight, or sorry, color, I should say. So, right, you can give examples here, color, American spelling, British spelling, anyway. Color, sound, flavor. Those are going to be special. And common objects, well, the examples he gives are going to be movement, rest, etc. Figure, magnitude, right? Those guys. Okay. So what's the incidental object of sense? Well, he says, we speak of an incidental object of sense where the white object which we see is the son of Dares. Here, because being the son of Dares is incidental to the white, which is perceived, we speak of the son of Dares as being incidentally perceived. Well, who's the son of Dares? It's some guy, right? It's whoever the son of Dares. It's you know, the guy who is the son of Dares. You know, it could be, I don't know, Cicero or Euthyphro. We'll do Cicero. I don't know if I'm spelling Cicero right, but Cicero, right? Cicero. So it's a guy out there in the world. So objects of sense, you know, the guy Cicero. Sorry, I'm sort of switching examples just because the son of Dares sort of adds an extra complication that, you know, we don't need to pay attention to. It's just, it's some guy. We'll say it's Cicero. We'll call him Cicero. We'll call the son of Dares Cicero. And so also out in the world, But it's only incidental, right? Why is it incidental? What makes it incidental? Well, we don't see the guy so much as we see the white. Right. So what do we see off in the distance? Well, we see, I don't know, somebody wearing white robes. Turns out it was Cicero. But what we see is the white. We don't see, the nature of the thing. Rather, we only see the whiteness. And so while we do see the incidental object in a sense, in a more proper sense, what we see is the white, which is the proper sensible, the color, which is proper to sight, right? So what we see are the proper sensibles of sight, but only incidentally do we see the objects of sense. Okay, so down here, lower on the paper, I've already sort of written out what the proper objects, color, sound, smell, soft, common objects, shape, movement, number, incidental objects, son of Dares, Achilles, bubbles. And now I want you to reflect on these for a moment. So remember, proper objects, those are things in the world, in reality, right? And so it's the color in the world, the sound in the world. I mean, and that is going to end up coming into our mind. Now, think back now to the categories. And we have the distinction between what's said of, and what's not said of, and what's present in, and what's not present in. Now, I ask you, what are the proper objects of sense? And what are the common objects of sense? And what are the incidental objects of sense using this set of distinctions from the categories? Are the proper objects of sense said of or not said of? Are they present in or are they not present in? Are the common objects of sense not said of? Are they said of? Are they present in, not present in? And similarly, incidental objects of present in or not present in. And in particular, are they further, are they substances, quantities, qualities, relations, etc. Right? So which of the 10 categories do the proper objects of sense, the common objects of sense, and the incidental objects of sense belong to? You might want to pause your video here. Well, maybe I won't spoil it. Maybe I will leave this as a question for your reflection that we can talk about together when we meet in person. So thinking about back to the categories and the distinction between said of, not said of, present in, not present in, substances, quantities, qualities, these two sets of distinctions, where do proper objects of where do the proper objects of sense fall? Where do the common objects of sense fall? Where do the incidental objects of sense fall? If you don't make it to class, come and talk to me about this, or send me an email, or we'll set up an appointment, because this is actually very important. So don't let this get by you. Okay. This is going to end up being very important. So you need to get that down. But okay, so you take all these objects of sense, especially the ones that are perceived in themselves, and these objects of sense, they're out there in the world, they're realities, and you perceive them, and they come into the mind. and we form proper sensible forms or species, common sensible forms or species, and then incidental. Sensible forms. And so this is sort of like how you know, the objects out there in the world impress on my mind, like the sealant ring on the wax, right? So a sealant ring, you know, you guys have seen Game of Thrones or whatever, right? Like a sealant ring is going to be a ring that, you know, when somebody wanted to seal a letter, they would drip wax on the outside of the letter of the envelope, and then they would press a sealant ring into the wax. And if the seal was broken, if the wax was broken, then you would know that somebody read the letter, right? And the sealant ring is like a stamp, right, where it's impressing into the wax, and it's leaving a kind of structure in the wax, a kind of form, right? And in that passage that we read from Aristotle, back from On the Soul 212, right? He said that in general, the soul was like the way in which the wax takes on the impress of the signet ring without the iron and the gold, right? So the soul takes on the impress of the proper objects, the common objects, and the incidental objects. So these share a form, right? So they're identical as to form, not matter, right? They're not identical as to matter. And so there's a direct transmission. They're perceivable in themselves, and there's a direct transmission from the proper common and incidental objects of sense to these sensible forms in the mind. Okay, and now we take the imagination, right? So that's going to be what we get out of the senses. So these all sort of belong to the senses, right? They live in the senses. They're creatures of sensation. They're the forms that live in our sensory faculty. But if we move out now to the imagination, right? And remember, we had memory and fantasy, right? These two branches. What we get there is, so we saw there's proper sensible forms, common sensible forms, and incidental sensible forms in the senses. Well, we can remember the color, or remember the sound, or remember a smell, or remember a shape, or remember a movement, or remember Achilles, or remember Bubbles, right? And in those memories, what's happening, the way that Aristotle explained this, is the senses impress upon the imagination like the sealant ring into the wax again. But now the form that's transferred, we get images, phantasms, right? So those are going to be the forms of the imagination, forms or species of the imagination. And so there's a kind of transfer of form from these forms or species, these sensible forms or species down in sensation. They impress upon the imagination, and then the imagination can entertain these forms or images or phantasms when not presently sensing, when you're not presently sensing the thing. And so that's how memory or fantasy works. Memory or fantasy works by recalling these images or phantasms, which are copied from the senses. And remember, image here is broader than merely shape or color or something that you take in through sight. It's going to include any impression in the imagination, any product of the imagination from the sensible forms lower down. Now, you know, so for example, right, I had an impression of Bobby Brewster. You know, I could feel the pain when Bobby Brewster hit me. I had the sensation of being punched, right? I felt the hardness of his fist, and I formed this hatred, and now I can remember that sensation, and that memory of the sensation of his fist is an image of Bobby Brewster punching me, right? Or I can form hatred, and when I was in third grade, and I was in third grade, and so that's also in a way going to be a phantasm or image. Now, I can also direct my intellect. So if we elect intellect to think about them, I can think about all the various images, and through thinking about them, I can compare them, and I can somehow form general ideas or universals. And I do this by pulling out what's common to several phantasms, right? So these general ideas, these universals, these concepts are going to be formed by finding what's common to several images or phantasms, and pulling out an intellectual form, species. Right? And that happens by way of a kind of copying from the imagination. And in the next video, what I want to do is I want to dig into this process where the intellect forms concepts and copies from the imagination, and spell that out more fully.